some changes, but typically, more or less, this is what industry-wide the focus of responsible AI is. Number one is reproducibility. Reproducibility, as I said, this is very big in research community. When you write papers and read some of the papers that are provided, many times the papers come with code, but the papers claim like 90%, 99% accuracy, but then the code really doesn't work, or you cannot reproduce those results. So in industry, when a data scientist is given a job to run some analysis and predict, ideally we want reproducible results, which we can quickly give to a different data scientist, and they can also reproduce the same exact results. So standardizing your MLOps pipeline, like I talked before about DevOps applied to ML, is very, very important, and reproducibility focuses a lot on that. And I'll talk about things like data and model catalog to actually enable reproducibility. Transparency is very important, like we saw in the examples. If you don't know what is going on under the hood, these models are black box models. How do you trust them? So a lot of work has been going on around interpretability and explainability of machine learning, and around fairness, to understand if the models are biased, to do fairness investigations, like we did using the IBM AI 360 tool. And if the models are biased, how do you correct those biases? The next aspect is accountability. Now, this is probably the biggest aspect. Now, a lot of these reproducibility, transparency, these are tools, but then how do you make the model accountable? How do you make sure that it is policy driven? I mean, every organization has their own ethics of or principles. How do you make sure your machine learning models are adhering to those principles? And when do you bring human in the loop? A lot of times, major decisions that are to be made, like for example, you have to decide that if your model accuracy falls below 85%, then you retrain it. Who decides that? So you typically need to have some accountability, some metrics, monitors to make sure your model your model is in line with your guidelines of your organization. And then last two aspects, which I won't cover a lot, but are security and privacy. So your model needs to be secure. How do you, especially this, we saw the example of gender shades, where there was a model that was published externally by IBM or by by Microsoft, and some researcher could just take some sample data set and say that this model is biased. So how do you protect? Now, in this case, they were proving that the model is biased, but what if they could attack the model? So many instances where the model is attacked, and you could understand what training data was used to train the model, or you could have the model perform negative calculations. So a lot of technologies like encrypted computation are kind of looking at some of these aspects. And then privacy is something that is playing a major role, especially in US and Europe. There is this articles like GDPR and then California data protection laws. So data is becoming a very valuable asset, like we talked in the beginning of the class. And it is important to understand that this data belongs to individuals, and the privacy of these individuals need to be protected. And a lot of debate has been focusing around this. So there are technologies like federated learning and differential privacy, which tend to focus on building models in a privacy-aware manner and keeping your machine learning, like quantifying the way you manage privacy. So let's talk about the first three pillars first. So typically, when you build a machine learning model, you typically when you build a machine learning model, you have this ML development cycle where you collect the data, you build a model, and manage the life cycle and versioning of the model. You tend to focus on the metrics of the ML model. Like typically, this is like the confusion metrics. And then when you deploy it to production, you look at the logging, so some standard logging. So typically, a model is packaged along with your software code, and whatever logging you have for the software code, like your Prometheus, Grafana metrics, like log monitoring, Elk Stack to monitor your logs. You can tend to use the same monitoring for your ML models also. However, problem with that is your machine learning model has different set of it has a different set of requirements, and it is working on data. So you need some different set of metrics to monitor your ML model. Just uptime is not going to do it for machine learning. So what recently MLOps is something that is gaining a lot of attention in the industry. So you are having this standard ML pipeline. So looking at from data management to model development to lifecycle to production deployment, you kind of have this standardized pipeline. There are many tools like you see in the bottom here, things like H2O.ai or data version control, DVC, Spark, Hadoop, of course. Some of the recent tools like PyCarrot, which is a really amazing low-code ML model development tool, or Data Robot, or for versioning MLflow to manage the lifecycle of the model, or TensorBoard or Git. So a lot of using these tools, companies are building standardized ML ops pipelines, which handle data management, handle the model management, model lifestyle, and production deployment. So uh, uh, coming back to the metrics. So what we really need is a DevOps for ML, which is called ML Ops. So you need to apply model monitoring and ops lifecycle to your ML. And the way you typically do this is using data catalogs and model catalogs. So the key thing here is to enable reproducibility, you need to know that your models are working on the same standard data set. So the data set is standard, and whenever you want to try a new algorithm, new learning algorithm, you want to try it on a different version of the on the same version of the data set which the previous algorithm worked on. So a popular tool is DVC, data version control, which lets you create a catalog of data sources. And once you have the catalog of data sources, you can know for sure that this model was tested on this version of data set. So you can quickly go back in production if you want, just like in your CI/CD pipeline. You give, this is the source code, this is the source code, this is the library version, and it builds a production package for you. So also you can use DVC and say, this is the version of my data, and something like MLflow will take that data version and reproduce the model artifact for you. Same way, you have model catalog, where what you can do is, once the model is built using a tool like MLflow, you can quickly take that model and host it in the model catalog. So now when you are deploying it in production, you can say that in this production, I want to deploy this version of model. So you can look at something like Jenkins, which is a AI, which is DevOps automation pipeline. And in Jenkins, you can say, take this version of the model from a model catalog and deploy it, and Jenkins will deploy it to the production and start monitoring it. So model catalog, data catalog, and your ML ops are the key elements of the reproducibility of your model. Next comes transparency. Like, you typically monitor these metrics like your confusion metrics, which tells you the true positive, false positive rates. And you monitor things like your accuracy, precision, recall, etc. But you also want to look at your model explanation. So now there are libraries like SHAP, which is a Shapley Additive Explanation, which looks at game theory approach to try to understand why a particular decision was made. What are the, like in this example, this is for one of the machine learning models, for banking, for predicting your loan defaulting. It will tell you why that particular decision was made, which are the features of importance. The top line on the bar chart say that credit history is the number one feature that is being used. It is most important, and after that comes the loan amount. So things like this, you want to have these libraries like SHAP and Lime, which give you your explanations for why a decision is being made, and that these libraries like SHAP and Lime should be part of your MLOps lifecycle. So when you're building an MLOps pipeline, you should also have a way to incorporate some of these decisions on in your MLOps pipeline. And then second aspect of it is, once you deploy a model to production, how do you monitor it? Now, we talked about the standard log monitoring systems, but ML needs more than that. You really want to monitor the data drift. Like in your data set, if you have a particular distribution of data, and this is where you kind of have a relationship between your data catalog and your ML monitoring. You want to be able to monitor the production data that is coming to your model. What is the distribution of the data? You want to compare the distribution of your production data with the distribution you have in your data catalog and see if there's a data drift. So if one of the features is having a change in distribution, and a prime example of this is with COVID. With unfortunate COVID, we had a lot of change in the spending patterns of individuals. There was a lot of increase in online purchases. So now you could see that a company like Amazon, they had certain pattern of employee of customers buying from online, and suddenly there was a change in the percentage of particular products because people were stocking up because of the lockdowns. Certain products increased in percentage uh, of sales. So there was a clear difference in the distribution of data. So now, if there are some forecasting algorithms which would predict the future sales for particular products, that totally changed. And so your machine learning models need to monitor that the data is drifting, and if the data is drifting, some alert needs to come back to your system, and based on that alert, you need to retrain your ML development cycle with new data. You need to resample the data from the current production, get the data back into the data catalog, create a catalog entry, and recreate this your ML model, and then deploy it. So that is the level of automation you need in production to manage transparency. And same goes with concept drift. Concept drift is a factor where not the data distribution, but it's the relationship between the features and the output changes. So if the relationship changes, there is a new policy that is introduced, and no longer that these two things are correlated. In that case, your performance will typically degrade. So you need to continuously monitor your accuracy. Now this becomes a little difficult because in production you don't really have the ground truth. When you have a data catalog, you calculate the ground, you capture the features and also the ground truth. But in production, you not necessarily have a ground truth. So there are libraries like Seldon Core, which will let you add some of the feedback to your data points. So along with new data points, it will let you add feedback so that you give it the ground truth, and Seldon will calculate how the concept drift is happening. And if there is a concept drift beyond certain points, beyond 85%, if your accuracy is falling, in that case, you want to send a signal that to retrain your model. So these metrics and these monitors are very important. And the last and probably the most important thing is your accountability. So you need to have an AI ethics committee, and more companies are now getting into this route where it may be just one person or two people, but they're forming this AI ethics committees for making these policy decisions. So they need to figure out what to measure. So things like you are seeing that the data is drifting. At what level of data drift you decide let's trigger a retraining of your model? Can that be automated? Can you say that whenever it falls, whenever the distribution between sales of particular product falls beyond 80%, you kind of retrain the model? Same thing with concept drift. At what level of accuracy fall? If it falls below 75%, you want to retrain. Can that be automated? Those decisions your AI ethics committee should do. And the second aspect is fairness reviews. We saw fairness plays a major role, and a lot of problems can be caused when we don't measure for fairness. So what sort of fairness metrics to calculate? We saw that these metrics like statistical parity difference, often they conflict with each other. So based on the problem that you are trying to solve, what sort of industry you are in, what fairness metrics you need to consider, and then for those fairness metrics, are they included in your ML pipeline? So do you want to include statistical parity difference on any data set that is available in your data catalog? At the same time, are you measuring, do you want to measure statistical parity difference in the data set that is coming to you in production? If you find that you're getting biased data in production, and that is what is causing your bias in your predictions, is that something you want to measure? So a lot of these important decisions and at what point to bring the human in the loop are taken by the AI ethics committee. So in my mind, AI ethics committee is a very important part of your organization. So if you're serious about deploying AI models in production, this is your bread and butter, you're building your business runs on AI, you need to have an AI ethics committee which actually looks at your entire MLOps lifecycle and makes key decisions on what to change, what needs to change, and how, if everything is working correctly. So these are three very important aspects of responsible AI: reproducibility, transparency, and accountability. And more companies are now giving attention to these. There are tools like MLflow, there is Databricks, even AWS SageMaker has tools which enable a lot of these things. They enable reproducibility through MLOps, transparency through your SHAP pipelines and or Lime pipelines, and then accountability using a lot of this auditing tools. So many new companies many upcoming AI companies are actually providing tools to do audit, where you can actually look at the risk of AI and provide an audit report. There is a company called Evidently, which tells you quickly monitors your drift and gives you a report of what all items are drifting and helps you give an audit summary of how your production machine learning models are doing. So these are the three major aspects, and the other aspects we treat. I won't spend a lot of time as privacy and security. So one of the major technologies that Persistent is heavily investing is called federated learning. So federated learning is a recent technology and gaining a lot of attention. The idea here is a decentralized training of ML models. So the problem is many times the data which is used to train the ML models is distributed across the globe, and there may be technical issues because the data may be large in volume, so you don't want to bring everything centrally to build an ML model, or there are privacy issues. This is, say for example, there's a network of hospitals. This is sensitive patient data. You don't want to send that data to every hospital just like that and combine the data. You may leak patient information. You may compromise on patient privacy. So what you want to do is you want to keep the data local to the machine and be able to train a model. So this is a new research that is happening actively across the major companies called federated learning, where you leave the data on the model or on the machine, and you just collect the model updates. So whenever you're so you start with a basic model. It could be anything with PyTorch. It could be a neural network built in TensorFlow. So there's an aggregator which creates a basic model, sends that model to all the parties. On the party, they train the model with the local data and only send the model updates back to the aggregator. The aggregator takes all the model updates from your the new model changes from the individual parties, adds them together. So that could be multiple aggregation algorithms. Typically, the common one is just federated averaging. It just takes an average of all your parties. You could do a weighted averaging where certain parties are more relevant data. You could give them weightage, and then that trained model is sent back to the individual parties. So now the parties get a new model, and studies have shown that by this, because you are training this model on multiple data sets which don't need to move to a central location, you are actually increasing the accuracy of your model, and this model gets a much wider coverage of data and helps, and it trains much better. So an insight learned at a hospital by party one through this process without sharing the data, that insight can be replicated at party two and party three. So this is the advantage of federated learning. And there are many libraries like IBM federated learning, PySift. There's NVIDIA has a Clara library, TensorFlow federated, different libraries which enable federated learning. So this is a very powerful technology which keeps the data local, manages privacy. At the same time, these model updates, since it is not sharing data, it is only sharing model updates. These model updates can also be encrypted, so it can be secured so that none of the data is shared between any of the parties. Using a secure multi-party computation, we can actually build machine learning models. And the last thing I want to touch base is on confidential computing. So idea of confidential computing is this is getting into more of security aspect of responsible AI. So here what we are doing is we are actually building a machine learning model in a confidential environment. So typically what happens is you have your data which is stored in databases. That is data at rest, and you can encrypt your database. That data is encrypted, it's secured at rest. When your data is flowing across, you are making a call to query data from a database. That data is in motion, and that data can be encrypted using HTTPS, so that now that data is secure and eavesdropper cannot see it. But what about processing? When you collect data using HTTP, you are actually running an analytic. It doesn't have to be machine learning, it could be any analytic you are running. How do you secure that data in processing? So there's data at rest, data in motion, and data at processing. So one of the ways to protect your data in processing is confidential computing, and there are two aspects. You could either have a trusted execution environment. So this is something that cloud vendors are providing a lot. Persistent has partnered with R3, who have a product called Conclave, which actually uses Intel SGX platform. So Intel has this secure guard extensions where they make a particular region of the hardware processor available in an encrypted format. So any code, any processing that runs inside the Intel SGX, that is encrypted, and nobody, even the processor, cannot access it, because this is a enclave, a secure enclave that is created, and within the secure enclave your code is running. So there's a guarantee that, because by cryptography, you're guaranteed that your that nobody else can eavesdrop into this calculation. So one of the ways using trusted encryption, trusted execution, but in another option is using homomorphic encryption. So homomorphic encryption is something again gaining popularity in the industry. Here you are performing computation on encrypted data. So typically you have to decrypt your data, send it to a processor, and the processor can do any processing, maybe NLP, computer vision. Your processor can do the analysis. But in homomorphic encryption, what you're doing is you are leaving the data encrypted with your key, and then the processor will only do the processing using your using the encrypted data. So anything, since the processor just has to do calculations like adding two numbers or multiplication, that happens on encrypted data. And once the encrypted data computation happens, you get the result back, and then you use the key to decrypt, and you can get the original result back. So this is an area which is very gaining a lot of attention. IBM has IBM, Microsoft, they both have libraries in homomorphic encryption. DARPA is investing heavily. They have a library called Palisade, and there's actually been Seal. So these are libraries. There are different schemes like BFP, BGP, and CKKS, which allow you to do homomorphic encryption. So this kind of takes care of the security of your computation. So this is another area which is gaining a lot of attention, and this focuses on security. So this is how we talked about some of the approaches where, first of all, you enable reproducibility of your machine learning models. You enable transparency using interpretability and explainability. You enable accountability using audits and making sure you monitor data and concept drift. And then you look at privacy of the data using techniques like federated learning. And finally, we ended at looking at security, either using a trusted execution environment or using homomorphic encryption, where you work on encrypted data itself. Don't even have to decrypt it. Data remains encrypted and secure. So these are some of the 5 aspects of reproducible AI. So just a summary, we talked about why responsible AI is needed. Look at some examples of how ethics violations happen in AI models, some problems with AI models. Talked about responsible AI and the facets of responsible AI, and gave examples of each of this. And now there are a lot of platforms coming up which have this responsible AI elements inbuilt into the system. And going forward, this is a very major area of research. And when you get into industry, or some of you may already be in the industry, I'm sure you're going to see more and more impact of these technologies. And this is definitely something that to look forward to in the future.